we abide, we abide.
So can you finish this phrase for me yet? This phrase that has been our touchstone throughout our Lenten journey. There is no way around the wilderness. The only way out is through. We've been asking ourselves, what does it mean to take seriously that there is no way around the wildernesses in our lives? Those major transitions, right? From retiring to coming out, from moving to a new city or starting a new career or business to continuing on after the death of a loved one, from leaving one church or form of faith in search of another, from moving out of your childhood home to relating to your child as a fully independent, capable adult apart from yourself, right? These shifts, these wildernesses reflect major ruptures in our lives, ruptures that sometimes feel a little bit too overwhelming to face. But this Lent, we are focusing on how, in order to heal them, we must face them. That time alone won't do it, won't heal us. Just moving on, sweeping it under the rug won't do it either. That there is no shortcut and no way around the wilderness. The only way out, the only hope for a truly new start is through them, one step at a time, trusting that as we open ourselves to that journey, to that discomfort, that we ourselves will grow and be changed. Not simply by getting onto the other side, but all along that journey. And we've been following Jacob for several weeks now in his story of epic failure and profound transformation. Right, over the course of 20 years, if you've missed those sermons, I'd invite you to go to our website and check them out, because each week has been building on the theme explored in the previous week. But this morning I invite us to hear Jesus' parable from the Gospel of Luke alongside the story of Jacob. Like the story of Jacob, Jesus' parable begins with a certain man who has two sons, two children. The younger, while not stealing his older brother's inheritance, demands to be given now what would be his upon his father's death. It's an act that's not only disrespectful and breaking with the customs of the day. I mean, the son is effectively saying to his father, you know what, you're pretty much as good as dead to me. Just give me what will one day be mine. I want it now. That's all that I care about. See you later. Right? The son's actions lead to progressive estrangement with his family. He travels to a distant country where he quickly squanders away that inheritance, living fast and loose, terrible decision after terrible decision, until it's all gone and he descends into utter poverty. At some point, it's not too hard to imagine all the shame setting in. Right? He's made his bed, now he's got to lie in it. Alone. Utterly alone, and so desperate is he that he hires himself out to a farmer who has him look after pigs. Pigs, which in Judaism, of course, represent an abomination to Jesus, his audience, and to this son. Cursed is the one who breeds swine, was the wisdom of the day. And so complete was the younger son's fall into desperation that he longed just to be filled with the pods that the swine were themselves eating. Like Jacob, this point of desperation, when the status quo is no longer tenable, becomes the very disruption that finally makes room for a new beginning. Instead of running from himself and his past as he has been doing, instead of drowning in shame and self-pity, this moment, Jesus says, is where the Son came to himself. What a picture for what the wilderness can sometimes feel like, right? A manure-filled pig's pen, and you are lying there in the middle of it. Unfortunately, that's oftentimes what it takes for us to learn how not simply to fall down, but as Richard Rohr invites us, to fall upward, to fall into a new beginning. But still, for the younger son, for Jacob, for us, this coming to ourselves still leaves us there in the pig pen, surrounded by manure. Right? We're still in the thick of the wilderness. This is just the beginning of our journey home. Jacob still has to walk into the horizon of a new day and face his brother for a new beginning. The younger son has to return to his father. We have to return to the site of our wounds in order to take the next step in the journey of healing and transformation. Jacob has faced himself. He's ready to grovel at his brother's feet, ready to beg for mercy as his way of going toward this new beginning of reconciliation. The younger son in Jesus' parable has a whole speech planned out. He's going to fall at his father's feet. He will confess how horribly and disrespectfully he's acted. He's not worthy of his father's love and acceptance. He's ready simply to be hired out like a servant to work in the fields. With each step on his long journey home, he rehearses this speech. Memories of home releasing tears of sadness and regret, mingled with tears of joy and love, all held in the uncertainty of that moment of what lies ahead. Finally, a small silhouette crests the hill on the horizon. As Jacob lifts his head, he sees his brother running toward him. What does that mean? Jacob's heart begins to beat faster, and Esau falls on him and kisses him. And together they wept, Genesis says. What's with all of these gifts, Jacob? I don't need your things. You are gift enough. And who are these with you? Come, let my men help carry your things the rest of the way home. As the younger son wipes his tears, he too hears something in the distance. His elderly father is full on sprinting toward him, or I guess whatever you would call the gait of an elderly man making his way toward his younger son. And the father, filled with compassion, threw his arms around his younger son and kissed him. And he calls to have his finest robe and ring placed on his raggedy boy like he is royalty. We're butchering the fatted calf. Gather everyone, get the music going. Today we feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. I can only imagine how overwhelmed Jacob and this younger son must have been to receive a welcome like this, almost too much. I'm not worthy. But this welcome, this grace, this love that God, our divine parent, extends to each of us. In contrast to what most of us both extend toward and receive from others, right? Esau and the father lavish prodigal love. No questions asked, no how could yous, or if you prove yourself worthy, that you're cleaned up, you show me that you've learned from your mistakes, that you've changed your ways, you're no longer a conniving idiot, well, then I will accept you back. That good old tough love, right? None of it. Here's the thing. The son, like Jacob, has wrestled with his demons, has summoned the courage to face his past and start anew. This wilderness work was necessary for this moment to become possible. There's no returning home, no new beginning that is possible apart from our own inner work. But ultimately, our journeys remain in some way incomplete and our world torn apart. The only thing that can finish the act of returning us to ourselves is not tough love, but prodigal love. This story is often called the parable of the prodigal son, right? Prodigal meaning reckless, wastefully extravagant. Like the older brother in the parable, we've long emphasized the younger son's reckless and wastefully extravagant living. But in reality, the climax of the whole story is the father's prodigal love. Reckless, wastefully extravagant love. True reconciliation, a truly new beginning, is only made possible by prodigal love. Punitive justice, tough love will never create the world that God dreams of and that we long for. A world where we are returned to each other. A world of second chances and where redemption is possible. Only prodigal love can do that. But at the same time, let's be real. How many of us, like the older brother, want to throw our hands up in this story and scream, "Are you kidding me?" No, I refuse to participate. The kid needs to learn his lesson, right? How else is he not going to just keep repeating the same mistake and taking advantage of them? Throw him out in the fields. God's grace should offend those of us raised to believe in a meritocracy. But like I emphasized last week, Jacob's story isn't merely a feel-good story, and neither is Jesus' parable. Because again, Jacob is Israel. Literally, that's the name God has given him. And this story, his story of foolishness, his hardness of heart, his story of wilderness wandering and redemption, his transformation, all of it represents the story of Israel, the collective people. It's their way of speaking about their own history, their own past and present and future. It's a way of talking about their own struggles and shortcomings, as well as their glories. Jesus tells his parable to invite his audience to reflect on their lives in a similar way. How do you tell the story of yourself? The story of us? The story of God's love? And this morning, I want to emphasize this aspect as we round out our wilderness journeys. that we humans are a storytelling, meaning-making species, right? For as long as we've formed families and communities, we've told stories about where we come from, about how we got here, about who we are. Our stories about our past are used to exemplify how we see ourselves now. And they shape what becomes possible, who we might become as we move forward into a new era. And you can tell a lot about a family or a church or a nation based on how they tell their story. Most often we either tell glory stories or stories of the dark ages. Right? It's either all good or pretty much all bad. This binary that is neither unhelpful nor true. I think the fact that we tend to do this, to continually create binaries, it's either this or that, reflects our struggle as humans to tell a thick story of ourselves, one that holds both our faults and failures as well as our joys and glories. But how might our nation look differently if the way that we told our story more closely resembled the way the Israelites told their story through Jacob, warts and all? What if instead of insisting that we simply leave the past in the past, why do we have to keep talking about slavery? What if we acknowledged the ways that the failures of our past continue to haunt and shape the present and the future that we are creating? That these wounds remain unhealed. That we have not had the courage, like Jacob and Esau, like the younger son and the father, to dwell in self-reflection long enough to truly begin again. We haven't done that. Like for them, this isn't about shame or self-hatred. It's about being honest. It's about learning to tell the truth, and that church might be a place where we can actually learn to tell the truth, which, as Jesus reminds us during Holy Week, will set us free. How might our families look different if the way that we told our stories more closely resembled the way that Jacob's family told their story, where we recognize our struggles, the things we wish we would have done differently, we apologize, we make amends, we self-reflect instead of just blaming each other. We recognize the enduring legacy of unresolved generational conflict, the work required for healing to take place. How might our churches look differently if the way that we told our story more closely resembled Jacob's story? If we acknowledge the shame that we, like Jacob, carry for calling ourselves followers of Jesus, Christians, little Christ, literally, while failing to seek justice and extend prodigal love and walk humbly. The ways that we have formed churches that too often conform to the toxic patterns of our world and blame and dysfunction, rather than the transforming ways of God. Or rather than seeing ourselves simplistically as the good guys, like the religious folks to whom Jesus tells his parable, what if we were willing to acknowledge the ways that we have acted more like the older brother? Self-righteously refusing to partake in the celebration that is God's prodigal love and grace because, well, let's be honest, we wanted to insist on punitive justice or tough love. What might become possible for us? What new future might emerge? What kind of community might we become if in our stories of ourselves we had the courage to honestly and truthfully hold our goodness, our accomplishments, alongside our struggles and our shortcomings, neither minimizing the other. At some point, in one way or another, as good as we all like to think that we are, and we all, no matter what, remain beloved in God's eyes, but as good as we like to think that we are, all of us find ourselves in Jacob's shoes. All of us, clouded by shame and stubbornness and poor decision-making, like the prodigal son, hit a low point. Find ourselves in entrenched conflict, repeating the same fights over and over again. We reach that point where the status quo is no longer tenable. Something's got to give. In this wilderness, the journey home of returning to ourselves, of a new beginning, it starts the moment we stop running from ourselves. That we look ourselves in the mirror without turning away in shame or self-pity and walk toward that horizon. And at the same time, this journey can only be completed when we, at this low point, have others who, like the father, like Esau, lift us right when we are ready to grovel, lift us to our feet and embrace us, and shower us with tears and kisses, with prodigal love. And having tasted that mercy, the power of that kind of love, when we then choose not to be like the older brother that we have all too often chosen to be, but we choose to be like the father too, to also extend that same love to others. Friends, this is the beauty of these stories that we hear week after week. They're not about finding the hero and seeing ourselves as the good guy. They're about helping us to tell thicker, more honest and truthful stories about who we are and who we desire to be and the work that it takes to get there. We are not just one character, we are a mixture of all of them. When we do this, when we open ourselves to this work, to this journey, to the changes, we find ourselves being transformed, not through our striving, but simply by taking one more step along the way. Even when we are at that point where we haven't yet crested the mountain, the hill. In the end, all that has been lost can only be found in amazing grace and prodigal love. Friends, may it be so. For your healing, for the healing of this church, for the healing of all the world.